He didn't want me at his wedding. Because I looked old and ugly. So I wrote the final chapter. Margaret Wilson sat in her faded armchair, its fabric worn thin from decades of use, just like her hands. Outside her window, the maple tree she'd planted when Thomas was born now towered over the modest ranch house. She held the photograph carefully, as if it might dissolve beneath her touch, her son on his graduation day, his smile wide and hopeful, her arm around his waist, her face beaming with pride. That was a good day, she whispered to no one. The living room was a testament to a life lived simply. A bookshelf filled with well-read paperbacks, many with dog-eared pages where she'd found wisdom or comfort. A television that was already outdated when she bought it secondhand 15 years ago. Crocheted throws draped over furniture to hide the wear. And photographs, so many photographs, documenting a life of small joys claimed from the midst of endless work. Margaret had never known luxury. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on a seamstress's wages. By 16, Margaret was working too, first at the Five and Dime, then at the diner where she met Frank. They married young, too young, she would later realize. But when Thomas arrived, she discovered a love so fierce it made everything else bearable. She remembered the first time she held him, this tiny pink person with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the world. "You were so beautiful," she murmured to the photograph. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. Frank worked at the paper mill then, and drinking was his religion. The mill closed when Thomas was 7, and Frank's drinking worsened. Margaret took on whatever work she could find, waitressing at the truck stop on weekends, cleaning houses during the week, and evening shifts at the hospital laundry. Her hands were never soft, her nails never painted, her clothes never fashionable. There was never money for such things. "But you had new shoes for school every year," she told the photograph. "And your college applications. I paid every single fee." She smiled, remembering how Thomas had struggled with reading until 3rd grade, when Mrs. Davis recognized his dyslexia. Margaret had worked an extra shift cleaning the town library to pay for the special tutor Thomas needed. By 5th grade, he was reading above grade level. "You were always so smart," she said. "So determined." When Thomas was 14, Frank left for good. No warning, no goodbye, just an empty closet and the blessed silence of no more arguments. Margaret had felt nothing but relief and worry about making ends meet alone. She took on more hours, ignored her aching back, and made sure Thomas had everything he needed for school. She'd stood by him through his first heartbreak, when Melissa Jenkins chose the quarterback over him for the homecoming dance. She'd worked double shifts for months to buy him the computer he needed for his coding classes. When he got the scholarship to state, she'd driven him 4 hours in her rattling Chevy that threatened to die at every hill. "You were the first one in our family to go to college," she said proudly. "I knew you'd do great things," and he had. Thomas had graduated with honors, been recruited by a tech company in the city, and climbed the corporate ladder with startling speed. He'd moved into a sleek downtown apartment, bought designer clothes, joined a fancy gym. With each promotion, each salary increase, his calls home became less frequent, his visits shorter. "I understood," Margaret said to the empty room. "You were busy building your life." She noticed the changes gradually, how he winced when she called his colleagues real nice folks, how he stepped away when she tried to hug him in public, how he never invited her to his apartment, always meeting her at restaurants. Nice ones. where she felt out of place in her department store clothes and sensible shoes. The photograph trembled in her hands as she remembered the phone call 3 months ago. "Mom, I'm getting married," Thomas had said, his voice tight with excitement. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Is it Allison, the one you've been seeing?" "Yes, and Mom. It's going to be amazing. Her family is handling most of it. Her father is the CEO of—" "I can't wait to meet them all," Margaret had interrupted, her mind already racing with what she might wear, what gift she could afford. The silence on the other end stretched until it became uncomfortable. "About that, Mom. The wedding is going to be— well, it's at the Woodlands Resort. Very upscale. Allison's family has a certain standard." Margaret had clutched the phone tighter. "I'll find something nice to wear, honey. Don't you worry." Another silence. "Mom, I think it might be better if you didn't come." The world had stopped spinning then. Margaret had sat down slowly, on the kitchen chair, the same one where she'd tied Thomas's shoes, helped with homework, bandaged scraped knees. "I don't understand," she'd whispered. "It's just—" Thomas had cleared his throat. "Allison's family is very image-conscious. There will be important people there, business connections. And you're—" He'd paused, searching for words that wouldn't come. "I'm what, Thomas? You're not presentable enough, Mom. You look old and it would be awkward. You wouldn't fit in." Margaret hadn't cried. Not then. She'd felt the words like a physical blow, felt something inside her crack and break. But she hadn't cried. Instead, she'd found herself saying very quietly, "Okay, baby. You're not upset?" The relief in his voice had been palpable. "Will you send me pictures?" "Of course, Mom. And I'll come visit after the honeymoon. I promise." After she'd hung up, Margaret had sat at the kitchen table until night fell. Until the room grew cold and dark around her. Only then did she allow herself to weep. The next morning she'd risen early, as was her habit after decades of pre-dawn shifts. She'd made her bed with hospital corners, showered and dressed carefully, in her Sunday clothes. Then she'd sat at the small desk where she'd once helped Thomas with his homework, and begun to write. Now, 3 months later, Margaret smoothed her dress, a new one, the first she'd bought for herself in years, and placed the sealed envelope on the table beside her purse. Tomorrow was Thomas's wedding day. She'd spent her small savings on a gift he would never forget. The Woodlands Resort ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight. 200 guests in formal attire mingled beneath chandeliers, champagne flutes in hand. At the head table, Thomas sat beside his bride, her diamond earrings catching the light as she laughed at something her father said. The wedding coordinator approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before the dancing begins, we have a special presentation. The groom's family has prepared a tribute." Thomas frowned, turning to Allison. "Did your parents arrange something?" Before she could answer, the lights dimmed. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, and music began to play, an old lullaby that made Thomas's heart skip a beat. On the screen appeared a weathered hand holding a photograph of a young woman cradling a newborn. Then another, a toddler taking wobbly steps toward the camera, a young boy proudly displaying a missing tooth, a teenager in a cap and gown. A voice, gentle, familiar, and unmistakable, filled the ballroom. "My dearest Thomas, if you're hearing this, then I've kept my promise not to embarrass you on your wedding day. I won't be there in person, old and ugly as I am." Thomas jerked upright, his face draining of color. "But I wanted to give you something. No one else could. The story of how deeply you were loved." The screen showed more images. Margaret working at the diner, her uniform crisp despite the long hours. Margaret helping young Thomas with a science project. Margaret sitting alone on a porch swing, looking tired but content. I held you when you took your first breath. I cheered for your first steps. I worked 3 jobs when your father left, so you would never feel the absence of anything but him. I stood outside your door when you had nightmares, making sure you fell back asleep before I allowed myself to rest. The ballroom was silent now, guests frozen with champagne flutes halfway to lips, all eyes on the screen and the increasingly pale groom. I'm sending this with my friend Eleanor's daughter. You remember Jenny? She works at the resort now. I've asked her to play this after your vows, when you are officially starting your new family. I wanted your bride to know what a loving heart you have, even if you've temporarily forgotten how to use it. Thomas's hands gripped the tablecloth, knuckles white. My gift to you is this. I've paid for a memorial bench in the park where you learned to ride your bike. It has a small plaque that reads, "For Thomas, who was loved beyond measure." When your own children ask about it someday, you can tell them whatever story you wish. The screen showed a final image. Margaret, in her new dress, standing beside the bench, smiling directly at the camera. I won't trouble you anymore, my son. I won't remind you of where you came from. But know this, I will love you until my last breath, and perhaps even after. Be happy, Thomas. That's all I ever wanted for you. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, a sob echoed through the ballroom. It took Thomas a moment to realize it had come from him. He stood on shaking legs. I need to go. I need to see my mother. Allison reached for his hand. Thomas, what? My mother. He repeated, his voice breaking. I need to see her now. He ran from the ballroom, still in his tuxedo, fumbling for his keys, his phone. He called Margaret's number as he drove, but there was no answer. The sky opened up, rain pounding on the windshield, matching the tears streaming down his face. When he reached her house, the lights were on. He pounded on the door, relief flooding through him, when he heard movement inside. The door opened to reveal not Margaret, but her neighbor, Mrs. Kaplan, her eyes red and swollen. Thomas, she said softly. Oh, Thomas. Where's my mother? He demanded, though he already knew the answer from Mrs. Kaplan's expression. She passed this morning, dear. So peaceful. In her sleep. The hospice nurse said she felt no pain. Hospice? Thomas whispered. I didn't know. She never said. Mrs. Kaplan's face hardened slightly. She didn't want to burden you, especially with your wedding coming up. Thomas staggered past her into the house. On the kitchen table lay a small box wrapped in silver paper with a card addressed to him and Allison. Beside it was another envelope with just his name. With trembling fingers, he opened it. My darling boy, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've come looking for me, despite everything. That gives me more peace than you can know. The cancer came back last year. I chose not to fight it this time. My life has been full enough, full of you, which was always the best part. I hope my wedding gift wasn't too dramatic, but I wanted to leave you with something meaningful. Not shame. Never that. But perhaps understanding. We all make mistakes, Thomas. The measure of a life is what we do after them. Your new wife is lucky to have you. Be kinder to her than you were to me at the end. And if you have children someday, tell them about their grandmother who loved simple things. Morning light through kitchen windows, birds at the feeder, and most of all, a little boy who grew up to be a man who still has time to become the person I always knew you could be. All my love, forever. Mom Thomas sank to his knees on the worn linoleum floor where he had once played with toy cars, where his mother had once danced with him standing on her feet. where she had held him through every childhood fever and disappointment. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the roof of the small house that had sheltered so much love, as Thomas began the long process of understanding what he had lost, and what perhaps he might still save. In his pocket, his phone buzzed repeatedly. Allison, his new wife, waiting at their wedding reception, surrounded by important people who suddenly didn't matter at all. Thomas took a deep breath and answered the call. "Allison," he said, his voice thick with tears. "There's someone I need to tell you about. Someone you should have met. My mother." And in that modest kitchen, surrounded by the simple treasures of Margaret Wilson's life, Thomas began to write the next chapter of his own.